Sex magic is using your sexual energy as our creation life force energy. We can also channel it to manifest all of our desires through different practices.
Janine is a sacred sexuality coach, speaker, and host of the Sacred Sex for Real Women podcast. She's passionate about helping women reconnect with their sensuality, awaken their erotic energy, and embrace their full feminine expression without the pressure to be more spiritual or do it perfectly. Through nervous system support, pleasure-based practices, and real-life tools, Janine guides women into deeper self-trust, confidence, and liberation. Her approach to sex magic is down to earth and empowering. She shows women how to use their sexual energy as a powerful force for manifestation and creating a life that truly turns them on.
Using our sexual energy, building up pleasure within our bodies, visualizing this scene and this reality, weaving in the embodiment into all five senses. We breathe this sexual energy through these various places within our body, shifting through some different blockages that may be there subconsciously or emotionally. Our sexuality is really where our power comes from. The greatest transformation comes through the taboo.
For a limited time, when you buy my best-selling new release book, you will get a ton of bonuses for free when you take time to leave me an honest review. I want you to get these bonuses. This is only available for a short time period. So if you head over to wanttowantit.com, you're not only going to get all these free bonuses, but you're going to get access to this book where we talk about root causes of low libido. We talk about how to have better sex. We talk about how to get more sex and how to be better at it. So head over to wanttowantit.com. Now let's get going with our episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of our Libido Lounge. I'm so excited. We have a super unique guest, something we've never talked about today. We're talking about the power behind sex, not just for pleasure, but also for manifesting, also for attracting in life the things that you want and then creating the life that you want. And to do so, I am bringing on an expert in the topic, Jannine Mackinnon. Thank you so much for being here with me, Janine. It's going to be a great show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to bring all of this juiciness to your audience.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because I know manifestation, law of attraction, mantras, these are common topics that I think are coming up a lot and have been coming up a lot for years in the growth-oriented type of industries, right? People that are looking to continue to grow their lives and to improve their mindset and to attract things into life that they want. So I know for a lot of people, the idea of manifesting or attraction, like things like the law of attraction, are not going to be new topics. But what is interesting, and I think a different shift on this, is the idea of using sex and using our pleasure body for that. So can you just kind of intro this for us? Like, what exactly is sex magic? How do you define it? And then we're going to get into a little bit about how people can use this to create the life that they want.
Absolutely. So just to kind of summarize it, sex magic is using your sexual energy, which I like to frame as our creation life force energy. It's the energy that literally creates life. And we can also channel it to manifest all of our desires through different practices.
Okay, so say more about that, because I know channel is is a word that will resonate with some people and not with others. So we're saying, okay, we have this energy and you channel it to create our life's desires. Can you say that a different way for people that might not really understand what we're meaning by that?
Absolutely. I'll break it down a little bit more. There's three main components. So using our sexual energy, building up pleasure within our bodies, whether we want to simply use breath, perhaps some gentle over the close touching, or going full out with our pleasure tools, perhaps with our partner, because it can be solo or partnered. And so we build up this pleasure. And then we weave in visualization and embodiment. And what that means is really visualizing the version of you that has that which you desire. And taking it a step further, rather than just visualizing this scene and this reality, weaving in the embodiment, which is a really big piece of my work. That's dropping into all 5 senses. So more than just what do you see, what do you feel? What is your emotional state? What do you feel on your skin, the temperature, your clothes? What do you hear? Is this conversations? Is there music in the background? Is it out in nature? What do you smell? What do you taste? And these senses do come to us in different capacities, especially if we're newer to this work. It might be a little bit harder to tap into that smell or taste, I find, but it builds over time with the practice. And then we weave in that channeling of the energy. And so what that is working with our chakra system, the energy centers within our body, going from root, basically your perineum, all the way up to your crown, the top of your head. And so while we pleasure and hold on to this visualization and this embodiment, we breathe this sexual energy, our turn on, through these various places within our body. And as we're bringing this sexual energy through our chakra centers, we are kind of shifting through some different blockages that may be there subconsciously or emotionally. A big one is up at the throat, where people will hold themselves back for fear of speaking their truth and being judged for that, or at their heart, feeling like they may not be loved for standing in their truth. And so as we move through this, and it takes time, and going all the way up to the top of our head with this visualization process, we shoot our sexual energy like a beacon of light out into the cosmos. So signaling, this is what we want. This is what it feels like to have it. And then feel this energy slowly coming back down into our body. And it really shifts your state and how you hold yourself. I find, compared to many different typical manifestation processes, affirmations, journaling, vision boards, it's not as much of a felt state. It's very logical. And so there can be those subconscious blocks hanging on in there, blocking us from the manifestation. With this being so embodied through the senses, it really helps shift our state. So I find that we start making decisions as the version of us who already has it, managing our relationships and interacting with people as if we're that new version of ourselves.
I love it. And I'm a scientist at heart, so when it comes down to a lot of things I talk about on this podcast, it's like, what's going on here scientifically? And I don't know if I shared with you this offline last time we talked or not, but one of my favorite things to do with my partner is if I'm working on something in myself, that I will, tell him like, okay, well, what I want whispered in my ear, and like what would be helpful from like a brain reprogramming, because we see like with visualization, with meditation, we see that the brain shifts into these alpha and theta, like these different brainwave states where the brain is more suggestible. Like that's the whole premise behind hypnosis, right? And so with that, like one of my favorite things to do with my partner is if I'm struggling with something, when I'm kind of more in a heightened pleasure state, then he will, say the things that I'm trying to reprogram my brain. And it's like, to me, it's like, okay, using the science of meditation, of what we know around the way the brain can be programmed in these certain states where we are more suggestible, and using that as a reprogramming. So that's kind of how I've used, something similar. And I'm curious, like your process is so detailed. So I'm curious about a couple things. And the first one is, I think if people are listening to this 3-step process that you laid out so well, one of the first things that might come up is, okay, but how do I do all that? And where do I do that, all that in my pleasure process? So let's say I'm starting the sensual process or the practice with my partner. Is this like, in your mind, the way you use sex magic? Is it to say, okay, well, we're going to put the orgasm and put, that sort of practice on hold, the build, kind of all of that, and really just focus more on, hey, this is a pleasure manifestation practice? Or is there a way that this is overlapping? And if so, how are we keeping our mind focused on all the things of the five, senses, plus like just, the intense physical things in our body and communication with our partner? How do we do that all? And how do we differentiate that?
Great question, because there are quite a few different moving parts. First, I will just mention that you have it so well when it comes to incorporating with your partner and those pleasure experiences while you're in those brainwave states, having him reaffirm those things. That's such a deep part of the different sacred sexuality practices I guide women through, because as you know, through pleasure, our nervous system is just fully open online with this beautiful play between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Plus, when we bring in all five senses, we have so many different areas of our brain open and activated. And then we're in those certain brainwave states that we're able to become so much more receptive to these visualizations, to these embodiments, and to the affirmations as well. So when it comes to doing the sex magic practice, I break this down in many different ways because, as I said, there are a lot of moving parts. So I do have a free sex magic ritual kit that outlines things for easy reference to know what to do at each stage. And then I go even more in depth in my courses. I have 3 different levels for moving through this practice. And when it comes to just beginning and starting, I actually recommend doing that through a solo practice. Because with all of these different moving parts, it's enough to figure this out for yourself and find flow and continuity throughout it. And then teaching your partner through it as well, having them find their own flow and then bringing that together. It takes time to get to that point. So I recommend starting with yourself in your own personal pleasure practice and getting a feel for it. With those different components, I think it's really great to start out with that visualization, with that embodiment, getting really clear on what it is that you want. Once you feel tapped into that, bringing in the pleasure, opening your system up to the receptivity for that visualization, that embodiment, and then beginning to work with your chakras and your energy centers with that. So it is a little bit of a building one on top of the other to find that flow. And when it comes to orgasming and what kind of state do we want to get with our energy with this practice, I'd say you want that orgasm if it's going to happen. The peak moment of pleasure should be when your sexual energy has moved through your chakra system and is at your crown or the top of your head and you're shooting it out. Now, that is not a requirement. That's why I like saying your peak moment of pleasure. There are different flavors for this. Once someone has a hang for all of these different moving parts, I like to start with a quickie sex magic practice in the morning, a couple times a week, where it's like 10-ish minutes. I think 12 minutes is the guided audio that I have inside my collective. And so you're just doing it in a little bit more simple of a way with breath, kind of moving your hips and your body, tapping into the pleasure a little bit with that visualization and the embodiment. And then when it comes to what I think of as the full-blown ritual, which is more around like 30, 35-ish minutes in the guided audios that I have in the courses, that's where you're really taking your time. You're getting so clear on the visualization. You're building up the pleasure, then moving through the chakra system while continuing to pleasure.
Okay, got it. So I think one of the other things that I think is going to come up for people here is, well, if they like, chakras, I think a lot of people do know what chakras or chakras, however we're going to pronounce it, are, but a lot of people still don't. And so I want to make sure we're inviting the men to this conversation as well, because I
Mhm.
know you are focused on women in your work, but if you're listening as a man, of course, any of this energetic
Yes.
magic works around manifestation also applies to you as well. So just to name that for all of our male listeners. And if people are really just like not that, say, tuned in to feeling, when you're saying, okay, this feeling of this energy rising, right? Like, what if somebody is like not really in tune to like what that feels like and what we're even talking about with these terms? Like, where can somebody start? Because another thing I really want to emphasize, everybody that's listening, is just like I mentioned with with meditation earlier. Like in my opinion, and I say this a lot in my work, is that sex in many ways is one of the best mindfulness based stress types of activity, right? It's all about being present in your body and bringing the mind back to the moment if the mind wanders. So I really love it, and it's a fan of mine too, to do things like take something like sex and pleasure and use it for the pleasure, use it for the connection, use it for all the things, but also use it for all this other power that's behind it, like what Janine's talking about here, with the idea of what we're talking about around what's uses for manifestation and abundance. But if somebody can't even like feel this energy moving up their spine and then like connecting, sending out and projecting to the world, and then taking a moment to feel into that and feel as if you are that person of your future right now, and feeling that feeling descend upon you, like you were describing, where do we begin if we can't even really feel that energy kind of like moving up our spine, like you're talking about? How does somebody even start if they're like, I don't even know what a chakra is?
Yes, and that's so many of us. And I know when I first began with this practice, the first time I was guided to connect with each chakra center, I couldn't feel anything. So I've been there myself. And I will add that with my courses, I've made them gender fluid for both women and men, because I find there just isn't that much information and resources about this topic available. So I didn't want to pigeonhole it for women, which is where most of my work lies, because it really does cross over for all genders to be able to work with their sexual energy in this way. And with my courses, with my level 1, I break it down even more in those steps when it comes to connecting with your chakras. So in there, I have a guide that explains the 7 main ones that we work with, where are they located, what do we associate with them. So for example, our solar plexus is for that action and will and taking charge in our manifestation. I already touched on the heart and throat a little bit. Root is for feeling safe and grounded in having what we desire to call in. And so I break all of this down in the guide to help people get familiar with what it is, because I find it's really helpful to have that logical backing before we drop into more of the embodiment side of it. So we have that understanding. And then when we're being guided in the practice, we can use that as a reference point. Because when we think about each of those things, we actually have our hormones react in certain ways as well, which helps with the felt sense of that. Joe Dispenza explains it really well in one of his books. I believe it's Becoming Supernatural, where we can bridge between the logical and thinking of what these chakras are associated with. And it actually helps us feel those energy centers more and more. And it is a relationship that we build. So once we have that logical side of these energy centers, then we can weave in the embodiment. And so how I break it down in my level 1 course is very step by step. Before you're even getting into the sex magic ritual, I have a guided practice where you simply connect with your energy body. I believe it's called the Connect with Your Energy Body meditation. And so
I don't know if I can interrupt you. Do you have a place where people can start today? Like, is there, because I know you're talking a lot about your courses, which we'll definitely let everybody know about, but I want to want to see if there's a place where people can actually start today. If they're like, I want to do something now and take an actionable step, like what would that be from like not being able to feel into their body?
It would be simply learning what those chakras are. And as you close your eyes in a bit of that meditative state and feel into one. So, for example, your root is around your perineum. Breathing directly into that space, associating it with safety, perhaps saying like, I am safe, I feel grounded, and noticing what you feel there. And perhaps it's nothing at first, because again, that's me, absolutely. And just taking the time to connect with each one in that way. And it is a practice. First time is going to be clunky, but as you keep coming back to it, you build that relationship with each of the chakras.
Just a quick reminder, if you've not, head over to wanttowantit.com to get your copy of my new best-selling book and leave reviews in order to get about $200 worth of free bonuses from myself, as well as gifts from sexual health experts around the world. You're going to want to get this to get to the root causes of low libido, solve desire mismatch, communicate about sex better, improve pelvic pain, erectile dysfunction, and so much more. Now let's get back to our episode. So it sounds like a good step would even be like just looking these up online and then saying, okay, well, doing like a breathwork technique initially where you're just putting maybe your hands on these different energy centers, breathing into them and starting to feel this. And then are you saying that, I know you have a much more detailed, process in your courses, but in general, that as people start to feel these areas of their body awaken, then are you seeing that in your work, that when people are more in a pleasure practice, when they're either solo or eventually with their partner doing, having pleasure, making love, that they're actually then feeling eventually this energy rise up their spine, like you're saying? Is that what you're seeing?
That can happen. I would say that tends to be more advanced through working through these practices quite a bit for it to more spontaneously happen when you're in the partnered experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of my work is with your personal pleasure practice, beginning to train your body with this and feel into the energy in that way. And that's when it carries over. But what I will say with a lot of people that I'm working with that are moving through various flavors of these practices is that through connecting with their body in this way and with that presence, as you touched on, their sensations just come alive. Like I remember so well one of the text messages I received a couple of years ago where she was like, my vulva feels alive. She's alive again after having gone through birth and motherhood, where she just felt so closed off. And moving through practices like this with the focused breath work, for her, it was specifically with what I like to call yoni, your vulva, your vagina, your uterus, for those that aren't familiar with that word, yoni. Is it helped her feel the sensations by connecting with that very specific area of her body. And so that transfers as you move through each of these energy centers.
So can you tell us some other stories more from like the manifestation side of things, that of what you've seen in the work that you've done with women and, and any men that you've worked with as well? Like, what have you seen from a standpoint of like real life examples of what has happened with, using sex magic? I would love to hear that.
Yes. One of my favorite examples, because it's so tangible, is this tattoo on my arm. For those that are watching this through video, is I have this floral tattoo on my arm that I manifested through sex magic. And so when I was moving through the practice, I was visualizing myself looking in the mirror with these various tattoos that I wanted to get. I believe it was 1 or 2 days later, as I was scrolling Instagram, I saw a giveaway post for a tattoo. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? I just had that practice. That's neat. So I entered the giveaway among thousands of other people. I don't know how familiar you are with those types of posts, but so many people are entering. I'm like, oh, that would be nice. We'll see what happens. And then it went out of my mind and I won this giveaway. And so I won an $800 tattoo through sex magic. So that's a big wow one. I have also had sales come up within hours of doing the practice, where I woke up, received the notifications, and it was for something that I hadn't actively sold in months and months and months. It just popped out of nowhere. I've had clients use it for calling in relationships, and I find it really helps them feel into the person that is a match for that partner, because we can envision we want these different kinds of relationships in our life and this particular type of partner. But often what gets missed is, what kind of partner do I need to be to call in this person? And so that's been probably one of the most rewarding to see with various people moving through this practice and messaging me and updating me, is that they've been able to call in what they will sometimes call their divine masculine for the women that I'm working with. And so that's really beautiful as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you mentioned Joe Dispenza. I'm such a fan of his work too. I've studied his work for years and just love him. And, he talks so much about, instead of like talking about our future selves as our future of someday I will have the abundance I want, and someday I will have the relationship I want, and someday I will have the house and family I want, actually beginning to feel into the feelings of what is that going to feel like to have that? And how can I take the feelings of the future and actually say, hey, I'm actually going to actively choose to feel these things today, even though I don't have them yet. And, it's that's part of the, drawing them in. And, certainly I think anytime we get into state altering, which is really what we're talking about here, it's so much easier to feel those things because we're putting ourselves into a different state. We're putting ourselves into different feelings, different emotions, and therefore we are actually sending out different information to the world. So I want to switch topics a little bit, because I know you do help people also with things like shame, for example. And, shame's come up on this podcast several times, and it will continue, because I think of all things that we talk about in the sex world, it's way more common than even a lot of people realize, because a lot of shame, I think, can happen from big T traumas, things like our abuse, our assaults, those kind of things. But a lot of shame can even happen from little T traumas, such as, wow, I was with a partner and, they were going down on me and they said something, just a sliding comment about how I looked or whatnot, like that, something like that. And, or maybe somebody jumped up real fast in the middle of sex and it was very state shifting and it felt jarring, and maybe they had something on their mind, but somebody interpreted it as wow, that must have meant I'm not very good, or those kind of things. So small T traumas, those can also, I think, be huge ways that we start to build shame in our body and start to feel there's something wrong with us. So I know it's different, like you said, offline, it's different. That type of work is different than sex magic. But can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on shame and sex and how you approach that?
Absolutely. I believe we all associate some level of shame with our sexuality. It's just the world we've grown up in, that most cultures don't have a very positive, what I like to frame as a beautiful, sacred relationship with our sexuality. There can be a lot of shame, a lot of dirtiness or wrongness or sinfulness associated with sex. When it comes to media and movies and different things like that, sex is framed in a very specific way, which doesn't necessarily reflect our experiences in real life. It's very fast, grab a boob, there's lots of lust, and then we orgasm together. And so when that doesn't happen, perhaps there's mismatch in those orgasms, then it can feel like something is wrong with us, and having shame around that, as well as our different experiences with our partners, with girlfriends and boyfriends and things as we grow up. And so we tend to layer on this shame, and you touched on it a bit in your explanation, is some of these experiences are very jarring. So we're shifting that nervous system state. Say it's, as you had mentioned, someone kind of jumping up and stopping in the middle of intimacy. We're going from that relaxed, open, parasympathetic nervous system state to all of a sudden our fight or flight response is on. And so our body can begin to associate this with sex. And so next time we go to have sex, perhaps with this same partner or in the future down the road with different partners, our body and our nervous system has remembered this if we haven't worked through it. And so we can come into sex more guarded and closed off, and it may begin to take longer for us to open up and relax. And then we put more pressure on it. And so it can begin to have this negative spiral where a lot of frustration and more shame stacks on. So how we get to use sexuality to work through this is very much like you touched on in the beginning. We can either ourselves or with our partner, when we are in an open and pleasurable experience and our nervous system and our body and our subconscious is open, we can reprogram ourselves with what we want to feel and believe. It can be as simple as just saying like, I am safe, I'm beautiful, I am sexy, I love sex. Incorporating mirror work with this can be very powerful as well. Seeing yourself in that state, feeling that way, and creating that safety in your system with it.
So say more about mirror work. Are you talking about using mirrors just like without, like when, say, you're creating a state and looking at yourself in the mirror? Or are you actually talking about more using mirror work within, say, a solo or a partnered sexual experience? Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So whether this is solo or partnered, having a mirror there and looking at yourself or you and your partner while you're moving through this with the affirmations. There's an added level of vulnerability, and through having that positive reinforcement through that vulnerability can be very reinforcing in our systems of I am safe and loved and sexy and whatever these things are when we're in this state. So for example, you're in a solo practice, there's a mirror there. As you build up, as you get to your affirmations, looking at yourself in the eye as you say these things, looking at your body as you feel that embodied state of I am safe, I feel good like this, I belong, I am loved as a sexual being.
So what about people, because I know there's so much around, body shame and sex shame and more from like the looks and appearance standpoint of things. And like an initial concern I have for some people when I hear like what you're talking about is like, what about the people that are maybe trying something like this and it almost pops them like into more of a dissociative type of scenario where they're not able to stay present because of any sort of hyper focus on certain areas of their body or body shame. Like, I know even in some of the one-on-one work that I do with people on Zoom, I've had clients that don't even want to turn their camera on their side because they don't even like just like fully clothed having a conversation. They don't even like, like looking at themselves to that level where it's like, wow, they can focus so much more on the conversation when they're not actually seeing, their own face. And obviously that's I think a huge sign of a area where a lot of self-love and, a lot is probably needed there. But while I see, kind of the benefit for people from a standpoint of like that mirror and visualizing back, I can also see for certain people how that could actually create more of like a dissociative type of experience around not being able to be in the present. So what do you say, like, how do you help people like that when it comes to doing, work like you're talking about?
That's where there's absolutely building blocks to this. And depending where someone is at in their journey, I think there's a bit of self-responsibility in leaning into like, am I ready for this? Or noticing if they try it and that disassociation comes up or that strong discomfort to it, not even wanting to look at themselves at all or feeling their body shut down and not feeling that pleasure. those are all signs that they're not quite ready for a practice like this. And so not including the mirror until they feel more ready for it. Depending what type of experiences or traumas they've been through, perhaps seeking more one-on-one support with something like yourself or myself to help support them through that. I also find journaling can be a really great intro into this. I love walking people through what I call sexuality shadow work. And so it's using that logical processing to start to look at things. Where do my sexual beliefs come from? So what do I believe about myself and my sexuality? Do I feel shame because my inner labia protrude outside of my outer labia? That's a very common one for feeling shame. And so looking at what do I believe? Then going further, where do these beliefs come from? Is it something a partner said in an intimate experience, or perhaps on more of the male side, some different remarks around not lasting long enough, or something like that? And so, okay, what have we learned in our partnered experiences? What did we learn from family? What did we learn from media? And really bringing clarity around where these beliefs came from, because often they're not actually ours. They've been something that we've taken on from these different experiences, from our different surroundings. And then looking at, what do I truly believe? What do I desire to believe? Because we get to choose our belief systems. As much as we've been programmed from our surroundings, we get to program ourselves through different practices like we've been talking about. So getting clear on what we want to believe. And then going further, how can we support ourselves in these beliefs? Perhaps it's listening to podcasts like yours, where it helps support these types of beliefs of, yes, sexuality gets to be fun and pleasurable and all of these different things. What other ways can I support myself with it? Perhaps I want to feel more sexy in my day-to-day, and so it's putting some nice underwear on underneath my clothes, so it's just personal, it's just for me, and it helps create safety wearing these things and feeling this way. And slowly building on building blocks like that. Often when we have a lot of shame and discomfort, it can be really hard to talk about things with our partner. And so another way is, again, using podcasts like yours and mine, where it's, oh, I heard this thing on this podcast. What do you think about it? So it helps take the spotlight away from yourself, and it can be a little bit easier to bring up in conversation. So there's all of these different little building blocks before we get to something that is a little bit more advanced, say with mirror work, where it's a bit more vulnerable and we can trigger more of that shame.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. And as we reach our conclusion here, I know we're going to let people know how to find out about you, but what else have we not said today? Do you feel like, is there anything else left unsaid that we have to make sure people know about?
I guess I would like to just share that I feel like our sexuality is really where our power comes from. And I like to say that the greatest transformation comes through the taboo. Sex is a huge taboo. So when we learn to feel empowered in our sexuality, when we learn to let go of the shame and the guilt and the fear of judgment and all of these different things when it comes to sexuality, and learn to use our voice and receive that positive feedback when we are in our sexual power, it has a massive ripple effect throughout all areas of our life. When we learn to be able to speak our desires and have them met from our partners, it becomes way easier to ask for a raise from our boss, for example. And so I find sexuality is often shied away from, but it really has this massive opportunity to come into your full authentic expression and see that ripple effect throughout all areas of your life.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here. I want everybody to know about your free 5-day sensual embodiment challenge that you've gifted our audience with. So tell us about that.
Yes. So the free 5-day sensual embodiment challenge, I will say it is geared more towards women. And it's to begin to get you in touch with your sensuality and rewire your nervous system and your subconscious to feel safe and radiant, moving through much of the things we've talked about. There's the sexual shadow work journal prompts within that. And there are 4 guided practices that are 10-ish minutes long that walk you through in a very slow step by step way without getting into full on pleasure. And so that is available for all of your listeners.
Okay, amazing. And we'll have the link for that, everybody, in the show notes today, as well as all the links on how to get some of Jannine's courses that she told us about, her website, her podcast, and, more of the ways that you can work with her. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with me. I really hope everybody will take some of these intro steps that Jannine talked about, beginning to feel your energy body, beginning to begin your pleasure practice from the standpoint of state changing for manifestation, and go and download her free challenge so that you can have that step-by-step guidance. Because as she said, there's a lot of steps by this, and having a little bit more of a program to work through can help you from getting lost on like, what do I do next? And what happens if this comes up? Et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely encourage you to use all those amazing resources she gave out. And thank you again, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of The Lounge. We will see you all real soon. Ciao for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibidodoc.com.